The morning they drove Cecily Fenn from Ashmore Hall, the frost had not yet lifted from the park, and the gravel of the carriageway was still grey with it, so that each step she took away from the house left a darker print behind her, as though the ground itself were marking where she had been. She did not run. That was the first thing the groom noticed, and later told his wife, and his wife told the laundry maid, and so the story moved through the village before Cecily herself had reached the road. She walked. She carried her trunk by one handle, because the footman who had been sent to escort her out had let go of the other end 2 yards from the servant's entrance, as though proximity to her disgrace might contaminate him. She adjusted her grip and kept walking. The second thing the groom noticed, though he did not speak of this part until much later, was that her back was perfectly straight. There are women who leave a house the way a sentence breaks off mid-thought, unfinished and unresolved. Cecily Fenn did not leave like that. She left the way a woman leaves who intends to come back. She had been employed at Ashmore Hall for 11 months as companion and reader to Lady Hargrove, the elderly aunt of Sir Edmund Hargrove, who held the estate and everything attached to it under a title that had been in his family for 2 generations and seemed, in Sir Edmund's estimation, to have been placed there specifically to ratify whatever he wished to do. He was not a man who thought much about the gap between rank and merit. He had found the two to be, in his experience, the same thing. Cecily had arrived the previous October with a character reference from the Reverend Fenn of Wiltshire, who was her father, and a small trunk, and the ability to speak French with a better accent than Lady Hargrove's previous companion had managed. She was 24 years old. She had brown hair that she wore in a serviceable knot at the back of her neck, and gray eyes that had the quality of looking at things rather longer than was strictly comfortable, and hands that were already slightly roughened from the work she had taken on in the years since her father's small living had ceased to provide any margin whatsoever. She was not the sort of woman the season noticed. She was precisely the sort of woman the season was designed not to notice. Lady Hargrove had liked her within a fortnight. This was not common. Lady Hargrove was 71 years old, and had spent the intervening decades between her youth and her current condition developing a very accurate assessment of character, which she exercised with the cool efficiency of someone who has lost patience for being wrong. She liked Cecily because Cecily read to her without affecting emotion, and because Cecily's French pronunciation was in fact excellent, and because when Lady Hargrove asked her opinion of the latest periodical essay on the question of entailment, Cecily gave her opinion rather than the opinion she suspected was wanted. This last quality was in Lady Hargrove's experience rarer than adequate French. There had been one afternoon in December when Lady Hargrove had asked Cecily to read aloud from a volume of natural history while the snow came down outside, and Mrs. Tench, the housekeeper, moved about the room setting additional candles. Cecily had read 3 pages about the migratory patterns of birds, when she had noticed Lady Hargrove's eyes were closed. She had stopped. Lady Hargrove, without opening her eyes, had said, "Do not stop. I am not asleep. I am listening more carefully than when my eyes are open." Cecily had read for another hour. When the candles had burned down to their halfway point and the snow had thickened against the glass, Lady Hargrove had opened her eyes and said, "Your father taught you to read properly. Very few people know how to do it." It was not quite gratitude, but it was something in the same family, and Cecily had recognized it as such. Sir Edmund had formed a different assessment. If you have stayed with a story like this before, you know already what that sentence contains. Leave a quiet moment here. What is coming is not a surprise, but the particular coldness of a man who considers himself entitled to what he surveys deserves to be rendered with the gravity it is due. Sir Edmund was 38 years old, and had never been refused anything that fell within his domestic authority to grant or take. He had a wife formerly, somewhere in the arrangement of his life. She had retreated to her parents' estate in Shropshire after the 4th year of the marriage and had not returned, which Sir Edmund considered a satisfactory resolution. He had an aunt, Lady Hargrove, whom he tolerated for the income her ladyship controlled from her late husband's bequest, and who therefore received from him a studied cordiality that fooled no one, least of all Lady Hargrove. He had an estate, a title, and an opinion of himself that the estate and the title had done nothing to revise. He had begun to pay attention to Cecily in February. Not the sort of attention that ought to be paid to a woman of her station, not the careful attentiveness paid to women of rank, but the other sort, the sort that calculates. He had spoken to her alone 3 times. Once in the library, once in the corridor outside Lady Hargrove's sitting room, and once in the East Passage, where the portrait of his grandfather kept watch with institutional indifference. Each time the conversation had begun as something administrative, a question about Lady Hargrove's schedule or a query about which volume was required for the evening reading, and had closed on a suggestion so delicately worded that a stranger might have taken it for nothing at all. Cecily was not a stranger to such conversations. Her father had educated her well in all the ways that signified, and she had spent enough time in enough houses to recognize the vocabulary. She declined. She did so without drama, without accusation, and with a precision that was, she was aware, rather more dangerous than weeping would have been. A woman who weeps can be managed. A woman who declines and looks directly at you while she is doing it creates a different problem altogether. On the 3rd occasion, in the East Passage, she had said, simply and without decoration, "I believe Lady Hargrove requires me. Excuse me, Sir Edmund," and had walked away from him. She heard him say, behind her, to no one in particular, in a tone that was barely above a murmur, "She is a governess's errand girl and nothing more. She forgets herself." She did not forget herself. She understood that he had decided something. The notice came 4 days later, delivered by the housekeeper, Mrs. Tench, who had the grace to look uncomfortable about it. The grounds cited were a failure of discretion and a manner unsuitable to a household of standing. Cecily read the notice twice, folded it, and placed it in the inner pocket of her coat, against the lining, where she kept the things she did not want to lose. She went first to Lady Hargrove. Lady Hargrove received her in the sitting room with the fire already lit, though it was not yet 9 in the morning, and looked at her over the edge of the wool shawl she kept around her shoulders through all seasons, as a matter of principle. Cecily told her what had happened without elaboration and without the particular careful vagueness that people use when they are frightened of what they are saying. She told her specifically. Lady Hargrove listened without interrupting, which was a courtesy she extended to almost no one. When Cecily finished, Lady Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told me you were dishonest. I told him I should require specific evidence before I revised my opinion, and he told me my opinion was not the point. That was 2 days ago." She adjusted the shawl. "I am sorry, Miss Fenn. I am an old woman with income controlled by a trust document that requires his signature. I cannot house you against his express instruction." "I understand," Cecily said. "I do not think you quite understand the whole of it yet," Lady Hargrove said. She reached into the drawer of the small table beside her chair and produced a sealed letter, which she held out without ceremony. "You will?" "When the time is appropriate." Cecily took the letter and placed it with the notice against the lining of her coat. She did not open it until she was 2 miles down the road, standing at the junction where the lane divided between the village and the market town, with her trunk resting on the verge and the frost coming off the fields in slow white curls. The letter was addressed to Mr. James Oates, solicitor of Fenwick Market Town, and beneath the direction Lady Hargrove had written, in her clear old hand, the words running small and certain, "Do not lose this. He does not know I wrote it. It concerns the entail." Cecily read it twice. She placed it back against her coat. Then she picked up her trunk and took the road that led toward the market town. The walk was 4 miles, and the trunk was not light, and she stopped once to rest her arm at a stile, where a field of winter-grazed sheep regarded her without opinion. She set the trunk on the stile and stood in the road and breathed the cold air, which smelled of damp earth and something further off that might have been wood smoke. She was aware of several things at once. She was alone. It was cold. She had perhaps 6 shillings in her coat pocket, and the letter from Lady Hargrove and the notice. And none of these things, taken together, constituted an emergency. They constituted a situation which was different. An emergency closes around you. A situation is something you can walk through, if you keep walking. She picked up the trunk and kept walking. Dorothy Marsh had kept a small draper's shop in Fenwick for 3 years and shared the rooms above it with a canary in a cage and a large collection of pattern books she had never used but found reassuring to own. She was a square-shouldered woman of 27, with the particular pragmatic warmth of someone who has decided that sentimentality is a luxury she can occasionally afford but not depend upon. When Cecily arrived at the shop door at 2:30 in the afternoon, with the trunk and the cold reddened hands and the precise level expression that Dorothy recognized from school as meaning that something significant had occurred and was being very carefully managed, Dorothy opened the door wide, took the other handle of the trunk and said, "Come up, I'll put the kettle on." It was in the small sitting room above the shop, with the canary making its mild observation from the corner, and the kettle beginning to sound on the hob, that Cecily told her the substance of it. Not everything. The letter from Lady Hargrove. She kept to herself for now, not because she did not trust Dorothy, but because she had learned that some things are better considered thoroughly before they are shared. She told her about Sir Edmund, and the notice, and the particular words she had heard him say in the East Passage. Dorothy listened with the canary and the kettle for accompaniment, and when Cecily finished, Dorothy poured the tea and said, "You should go to Oates, the solicitor on the Market Square. He is a thorough man. He does not lose cases he should win, and he does not take cases he should not win. My father used him when the mill burned and the insurance company wrote their letter." She pushed the sugar towards Cecily. "Go tomorrow morning. Tell him what you have." James Oates was a small, dry man, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent 30 years reading documents that other people wished he had not read. He received Cecily in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, read Lady Hargrove's letter, and then read it again. He did not speak for nearly 3 minutes, which Cecily found reassuring rather than unsettling. Men who speak quickly after reading legal documents are generally not thinking about the documents. "You understand," he said at last, "that what Lady Hargrove has described here, if accurate, represents a significant procedural irregularity in the Ashmore entailment." "I understand that it represents something," Cecily said. "I do not understand the law well enough to know precisely what." "The law," Oates said, "in this instance is quite clear. A competency assessment signed by Sir Edmund, as both trustee and primary beneficiary, without independent witness, executed during the period of Lady Hargrove's documented illness, is not a competency assessment. It is a piece of paper with ink on it." He folded the letter. "Lady Hargrove retained the letters from her physician. She says they are in the small writing desk in her dressing room. The key is with the letter." Oates looked at the small key on the table between them. He picked it up. "Miss Fenn," he said, "I think you should know that there are certain processes available under the law which your employer, your former employer, will find exceedingly inconvenient. A writ compelling production of the relevant documents. A request for examination by the magistrate's court regarding the validity of the trust amendment. These are not rapid processes." He paused. "But they are exact ones." "How long?" Cecily asked. "Perhaps 6 weeks. Perhaps 8. He studied her. "You have somewhere to stay." She named Dorothy. Oates nodded, made a note and said, "Come back Thursday. I will have some documents for you to sign. And Miss Fenn," he looked at her steadily, "do not in the interim put yourself anywhere that Sir Edmund might encounter you and claim intimidation. The process requires that you remain a straightforward complainant." "I have been straightforward my entire life," Cecily said. "It has not always served me well. It will serve you now," Oates said. The weeks that followed had a quality she did not entirely expect. She had anticipated endurance and she got it, but she also got something alongside it that she had not budgeted for, which was a kind of ordered forward motion that felt almost like competence, as though the situation were not happening to her, but being managed by her, which was a distinction she had not clearly apprehended before now. She signed the documents Oates had prepared on Thursday. She answered the questions he put to her on the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. He was precise in his questions, and she was precise in her answers. and she found that she respected him in the undemonstrative way she tended to respect people who were good at their work and did not make a performance of being so. He told her at their third meeting that the petition had been formally submitted to the magistrate's court and that he expected a response within the fortnight. She went back to the room above the shop and wrote to her father that evening, the first time she had written to him since leaving Ashmore, and told him as much of the situation as she judged useful, which was most of it. Her father had spent 50 years as a clergyman, and knew more about the varieties of human failure than most legal men she was likely to encounter. She wanted him to know. She received his reply 4 days later. It was a single page in his close, careful hand, and it said, among other things, that she had her mother's quality of going directly at a thing, without pretending it is not there. I have always found this admirable. I find it more so now. Go carefully, my dear. There is a difference between what is owed to prudence and what is owed to fear. Do not confuse them. She kept the letter with the notice and the key. Inside her coat the magistrate's name was Mr. Bria, Cornelius Vane, and he was known in the county for two things: an absolute unwillingness to be hurried and an absolute precision when he moved. He had served the magistrate's court for 22 years. He had seen, in those years, a sufficient number of cases involving titled gentlemen and documents of questionable provenance that he had developed what his clerk privately described as a very specialized form of patience. He received Oates's petition on a Wednesday morning and returned a writ by the following Monday. Cecily learned of it from Oates on the Tuesday. She sat across from his desk while he read her the relevant passages, the order compelling Sir Edmund Hargrove to present, within 14 days, all documentation pertaining to the Ashmore Trust Amendment of the previous autumn, for examination by the court, and she held very still. The way she had learned to hold still when things she had counted on began to move. He will be told, Oates said, in approximately 48 hours. Yes, Cecily said. He will not, in all likelihood, be pleased. No, she said. The next step, Oates said, and here he permitted himself something that was almost a dry smile, will require your presence at Ashmore Hall. The court will wish to examine you alongside the relevant documents and the relevant parties. He looked at her. Are you prepared to return to the house? Cecily thought of the carriageway in the frost, the darker prints she had left in the gray gravel. The way she had walked. Yes, she said. I am. The examination was set for a Friday, 2 weeks hence. Oates arranged a carriage. On the appointed morning, Cecily dressed in the best of what she had, a gray wool gown well kept, and her father's small garnets at her throat that had been her mother's before that, and met him at his office at 8 o'clock. And they drove the 4 miles to Ashmore Hall in a silence that was companionable rather than anxious, because Oates was a man who understood the utility of quiet, and Cecily had learned by now that she was one too. The carriageway looked the same. The gravel was dry today, the frost having lifted 3 weeks ago into a tentative late March warmth, and the elms along the drive were just beginning to show the first soft suggestion of green. The hall itself stood exactly where she had left it, which was the sort of obvious observation that the mind nevertheless requires to make, sometimes when it is bracing for something. Mr. Cornelius Vane was already there. He stood in the entrance hall with his clerk and 2 bailiffs, examining the paneled wall as though it were a legal document that might yet yield information, and when Cecily entered he turned and looked at her with the thorough, unhurried attention of someone who has read her name in a petition and was now comparing the name with its source. Miss Fenn, he said. Mr. Vane, she said. Sir Edmund was in the library. He had been, according to Mrs. Tench's carefully expressionless face, in the library since 7 o'clock that morning. When the party was assembled, and the magistrate's clerk announced their entry, Sir Edmund stood behind the great desk with his hands pressed flat against its surface, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has spent considerable time this morning assembling his authority, and is finding it slightly less solid than he had expected. He looked at Cecily once, briefly, with the particular quality of look that men of his type produce when they encounter a woman who has done what they were certain she could not do. The look lasted perhaps 2 seconds. He transferred it to Mr. Vane. "This matter," Sir Edmund said, "is a misunderstanding. The woman was dismissed for cause. Her claims are the product of wounded feeling and a desire for retaliation." "She is a governess's errand girl and nothing more," said Lady Fairfax, Sir Edmund's nearest female relation, who had arrived from the neighboring estate 3 days ago at Sir Edmund's express request, and was standing to his left with the particular posture of a woman who is doing a favor and knows it. She was never a suitable companion for Lady Hargrove. She had ideas above her position from the first. Mr. Vane heard all of this with the equanimity of a man who has heard a great many things in 22 years. "I am not here to assess Miss Fenn's suitability," he said. "I am here to examine the documents specified in the writ. If you would be so good, Sir Edmund." Sir Edmund produced the documents. He had clearly spent some portion of the preceding 2 weeks attempting to prepare them for examination. But there is a limit to what can be done with documents that simply do not contain what they are required to contain. Oates and Mr. P. Vane's clerk went through them methodically with the specific and almost domestic efficiency of men who work with paper every day and do not find it necessary to dramatize the fact. Cecily sat in the chair that Oates had placed for her to one side of the desk, within sight of Mr. Vane, and held her hands in her lap, and did not look at Sir Edmund. She looked instead at the shelves. She had spent a great many hours in this library, reading to Lady Hargrove, when her aunt chose to take her afternoon rest here, rather than in the sitting-room upstairs. She knew the arrangement of the shelves. She knew which volumes were worn at the spine from use and which were preserved by indifference. She knew the particular quality of the afternoon light in January, when it came through the tall windows at a low angle, and caught the gilt on the oldest bindings. She had been in this room in all the ordinary ways, competent and useful, and at ease. She wished Sir Edmund to notice that she was still all 3 of those things. Lady Hargrove was brought down from her rooms at 10:30, in a chair carried by 2 of her own footmen, men she had employed before Sir Edmund inherited the estate, and who regarded her accordingly. She was small in the chair, but her back was straight. When she was positioned near the window, in the March light, she looked at Cecily for a long moment, and Cecily looked back, and something passed between them that was beyond what the room required. "Lady Hargrove, Mr. Vane said, "I need only confirm the substance of the letter you sent to Mr. Oates. I will not tax you further than necessary." "You will not find me easily taxed," Lady Hargrove said in a voice that made Sir Edmund's hands tighten against the desk. "When the question concerns a document I signed while suffering a fever of 3 weeks' standing, without benefit of my own solicitor, in the presence of my nephew only. I was 69 years old. I was not incompetent. I was ill. These are different conditions, and the law, I am given to understand, recognizes the distinction." "It does," Mr. Vane said. "I was also," Lady Hargrove continued, in the same level tone, "told that what I was signing concerned only a minor administrative amendment to the household management provisions. I was not told that it concerned the income arrangement." She paused. "I am 71 years old. I have not yet become confused about the difference between a household account and a trust document. I was simply not given the opportunity to read what was in front of me." The examination proceeded for another 90 minutes. Lady Fairfax made 2 further attempts to introduce the question of Cecily's character into the proceedings, and Mr. Porte. Vane acknowledged both, with a courtesy so complete that it contained no room at all for the question to take hold. "On the second occasion," he said mildly, "Miss Fenn is a complainant in a matter of trust documentation, ma'am. Her personal character, however it may or may not have stood in relation to her former employment, is not before this court today." Lady Fairfax subsided. Sir Edmund said, at one point with the particular bluntness of a man who has run out of more oblique alternatives, "She refused her duties. She was insolent. I had every right to discharge her." Mr. Vane looked at him. It was a very particular look. the look of a man who has just written a sentence in his private ledger and does not intend to share its contents until the appropriate moment. "Sir Edmund," he said, "your right to discharge a household employee is not in question today. The validity of a trust amendment executed under the conditions Lady Hargrove has described is the question before me. I suggest we keep to it." There was a moment, late in the examination, when Sir Edmund turned his head and looked at Cecily with a directness that surprised her, not because of its hostility — she had expected hostility — but because of what was behind the hostility, which was something closer to confusion than she would have anticipated. She thought he was a man who had genuinely not believed she would come back. She thought he was a man who had understood in the abstract that legal processes existed but who had not translated that abstraction into the specific figure of a woman from Wiltshire sitting upright in his library with small garnets at her throat. Having walked back in through his front door on the appointed morning, as though she had every right to be there, which she had. That was the thing he kept encountering and not quite being able to accommodate. She had every right to be there. She did not return the look. She did not look away either. She simply continued looking at the shelves, where the afternoon light was doing what it always did in this room. The conclusion came quietly, as legal conclusions do, not with the force of a hammer, but with the particular finality of a door being closed by someone who knows exactly what he is doing. Vane collected the documentation, consulted briefly with Oates, and then addressed the room from his position near the window, where the marchlight came in at a low angle, and made the whole scene look, briefly, like something that had been arranged for an engraving. The trust amendment of the 14th of November does not meet the procedural requirements established by the relevant statute, he said. The documentation will be referred to the court for formal review. In the meantime, the terms of the original trust instrument, which names Lady Hargrove as controlling beneficiary during her lifetime, are reinstated as the operative document. Sir Edmund, you will receive formal notification within the fortnight. He paused. Is there anything further that requires the court's attention? The room was quiet. Sir Edmund's hands were no longer flat on the desk. They were at his sides, and the particular quality of the silence around him was the silence of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of something he had believed to be smaller. It was Lady Hargrove who spoke. She looked not at Mr. Vane, but at Cecily, and her voice was the calm, considered voice of a woman who has been saving a particular sentence for the right moment. "I believe Miss Fenn's previous position in this household is available, if she would consider returning to it. Under the terms of the original trust, the arrangement of my household is mine to make." Cecily felt something shift in her chest, not dramatically, not with the violence of relief, but with the specific weight of a thing that has been held in a careful place for a long time and is now permitted to settle. She looked at Lady Hargrove. "I should be very glad to return," she said. Sir Edmund left the library before the carriage had been called. Cecily heard his steps on the stone floor of the entrance hall, measured and deliberate, and then the sound of a side door, and then nothing. Lady Fairfax gathered herself with the compressed dignity of a woman who has attended a defeat and intends to account for her presence as briefly as possible. She said as she passed Cecily, in a voice that was almost too low to hear, "You were always more than an errand girl, I suppose?" It was not quite an apology. It was not. Entirely. Nothing. "Mr. Connor—" Oates shook her hand with the brief, firm sincerity of a man who does not use the gesture carelessly. "You were," he said, "a very straightforward complainant." "You told me to be," Cecily said. "I did," he said. "Most people require the reminder a second time. You did not." Mr. Vane, preparing to depart, paused near the door and looked at her one final time. He had the expression of someone who has had occasion, in his professional life, to witness many things, and who has not, after 22 years, ceased to find some of them worth noticing. "Miss Fenn," he said, "the law is a slow instrument. You were patient with it." "I was patient with what I could not change," she said, "and when I could change something, I did." He nodded, once in the manner of a man who is satisfied with an answer, and went out, If you have stayed this long, and something tells me you have, then you understand already what this moment costs and what it means. The small quiet of it, the absence of spectacle. Leave your thought in the space below if Cecily's particular kind of courage moved you, or simply carry it with you when you go. Lady Hargrove was assisted back to her rooms at noon. Before she went, she called Cecily over with a gesture of one hand, small, direct, not performative, and when Cecily came close she took her hand in both of hers, which were very thin and very warm. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Your father raised you well. I hope you will allow me to tell him so." "I will write to him this evening," Cecily said. "Tell him also," Lady Hargrove said, releasing her hand, "that his daughter kept a very straight back on a very cold morning, and that I saw it from the window." She paused. "I watched you walk, Miss Fenn. I thought, that is a woman who intends to come back." Mrs. Tench, when Cecily encountered her in the corridor 10 minutes later, looked at her with the expression of a woman who has just survived something she had not entirely anticipated, and is now reorganizing her understanding of the situation. "Your room," she said after a moment, "has not been reassigned." She paused. "I aired the linens last week, as a matter of course. It was not, strictly speaking, a welcome." Cecily understood it as the closest approximation that Mrs. Tench's particular form of pride was likely to produce, and she received it accordingly. She stood for a long time in the library after everyone else had gone, alone with the March light and the disorder of papers still spread across the desk and the quiet that settles over a place when important business is concluded and the people involved in it have gone to attend to the ordinary things that follow. She looked at the shelves. She looked at the chair she had been sitting in, which was not the chair she usually occupied when she read to Lady Hargrove. That one was by the window, but which was now the chair she would also remember, in the particular way one remembers, chairs in which one has sat through significant hours. She went to the window. The carriageway was just visible from here, the elms greening along its edge, the gravel pale in the noonlight. She looked at it for a while. She thought of the frost, and the darker prints, and the one handle of the trunk, and the way she had adjusted her grip. She thought of her father's voice reading to her from Blackstone's commentaries when she was 11 years old, with the particular patience of a man who believed that a girl who could read a legal text could read anything, and that a girl who could read anything was not undefended. She had the notice, still in the pocket of her coat, folded against the lining. And next to it, the letter from Lady Hargrove and her father's letter from Wiltshire, and the key to the small writing desk that had contained the physician's letters, which was no longer needed now that the letters had served their purpose, but which she found she did not want to give back. It was a small brass key, ordinary, the kind made by the dozen in any market town. She pressed her thumb against its teeth. Her room was where she had left it. She went up the stairs with the same trunk she had carried down them 8 weeks ago, and opened the window, and aired the linens further, and set her small things back on the mantelpiece where she had kept them, the miniature of her mother, the worn copy of Cowper her father had given her at 18, and the 2 river stones from Wiltshire that she had carried with her since childhood because she had never yet lived anywhere that did not eventually make her want to remember that there were places older and more permanent than any house. She wrote to her father that evening, at the small desk by the window, while the dusk came down over the park, and the first candles were lit in the rooms below, and the sound of the house settling into its evening self moved quietly through the walls. She told him about the frost in the carriageway. She told him about Oates and Dorothy and Mr. Vane's look at the door. She told him that it had taken 8 weeks, and that she had been patient mostly, and that she had been afraid sometimes, at 3 o'clock in the morning when the market square was empty and the cold came through the glass, but that she had not let the fear alter anything she did, which she believed was what he had taught her, though he had never said it in so many words. She told him also that Lady Hargrove had watched her walk down the carriageway from the window, and had thought she intended to come back, and that she had been right. The notice she folded smaller, and placed back in her coat pocket. With the brass key she would keep both, not as evidence, not as armor, or reminder. She would keep them the way people keep the small objects that mark the moments when the world attempted to close a door on them, and they stood outside in the cold and considered what door to try next. The key in particular she would keep, because it had once unlocked the thing that needed unlocking, and because there was a quality to small ordinary objects that have done their specific work that she found it difficult to relinquish. The spring came on in the weeks that followed, and with it the ordinary resumption of things. The reading, the French, the correspondence, the afternoon hours in the sitting room, or the garden, or the library, where the light moved across the shelves in the way she had always found reliable and good. Lady Hargrove was, if anything, in better spirits than she had been the previous autumn. The physician who attended her in April noted in his records that his patient appeared to have resolved some matter that had been troubling her and attributed the improvement in her outlook to the resolution. This was substantially accurate. Sir Edmund was present in the house. Formally, as he had always been, he did not speak to Cecily. He did not look at her with the calculating attention he had directed at her in February. He looked at her when their paths crossed in a corridor or a doorway, with the particular compressed quality of a man who is engaged in a private renegotiation of something he had not expected to need to renegotiate. It was not quite chastened. It was the expression of a man who has encountered a limit he did not know was there, and is now establishing, for his own reference, exactly where it lies. She did not gloat. She would not have known how. And in any case, there was nothing in the outcome that called for it. She had been restored to a position she had held honestly. Lady Hargrove's income was secured, as it ought to have been secured. Oates had been paid his fee, which was moderate and fair. The law had done what it was designed to do, slowly and exactly, as Oates had said it would. These were not the materials of triumph. They were the materials of a situation that had been correctly resolved, which was a different and quieter thing. That summer, her father came to visit, the first time she had seen him in 2 years. They sat together in Lady Hargrove's garden in the long evening light, and he held the miniature of her mother in one hand, as he often did when he was thinking carefully about something, and was quiet for a long time. Then he said that he was glad. She had not been the sort of woman who ran. "I am not sure I am the right sort of woman for running," she said. "My shoes are not made for it." He looked at her. He was 63 years old, her father, and his face had the quality of a face that has been well used, that has looked honestly at difficult things and continued looking. He said, "You are the right sort of woman for exactly what you did." She thought about that for a long time afterward, not because she needed persuading of it, exactly, but because she found she wanted to turn it over, the way you turn over a river stone, to see the different color on the side that has been against the water. She had done what she had been taught to do, which was to go directly at a thing without pretending it was not there. She had been patient with the law and exact in her account of events, and she had walked back through a door she had been walked out of, and none of it had required courage in the theatrical sense, the kind that involves declarations or gestures or a crowd to witness them. It had required the other kind, which is the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside except a woman walking down a road with a trunk. The notice and the key and her father's letter. She kept in the small wooden box at the back of the wardrobe, with the river stones and the copy of Cowper. She did not take them out again for a long time. She did not need to. She knew what they were. In the evenings, when the work was done and Lady Hargrove was resting, and the house had settled into its particular quiet, Cecily would sometimes sit by the window of her room and look out over the park, where the elms were fully green now, thoroughly and without qualification, and the carriageway ran pale and straight through them toward the road. She was not in the habit of reflection for its own sake. She was in the habit of knowing where she was, and she knew where she was. She was in a house that had tried to lose her and had not managed it. She was in a room she had walked back into, carrying her own trunk. House. She was in a position she had not been given back, but had moved through the correct channels to reclaim, which was a distinction that mattered to her in ways she could not have precisely articulated, but did not need to, because the people who needed to understand it had understood it, and the people who had not understood it had been given the opportunity to encounter it. The elms caught the evening light. The house was quiet. She sat at the window with her book in her lap and the small brass key on the sill beside her, catching the last of the sun. And she was not triumphant, because triumph requires an audience, and she had never particularly needed one, but settled in the deep, specific, unglamorous way of a person who has done what was required and found it was enough. Thank you for staying until the end. This one was Cecily's, and she earned every word of it.